Welcome to this segment of Keiser Report's Summer Solutions, in which we propose possible solutions to the economic, monetary, and financial crises that ail us. In this segment, we're going to talk to Ponzi economics. We live on a planet Ponzi, so there's no better person to talk to about all the problems that create than the author of Planet Ponzi, Mitch Feierstein. Mitch, welcome.
Thanks for having me here, Max.
All right, Stacy, what are we going to talk about?
Well, Mitch, you in your book, Planet Ponzi, identified the problem that we have global Ponzi schemes everywhere we look. Why is this a problem? But how did this problem start? And what are some of your solutions, just like the top 2, 3, 4 of them?
It's pretty funny, actually. The book, I wrote, and it came out in 2012, late 2012. Then a revision came out in 2013 in the paperback, a slight update, where I said in the afterword, which is about 20 pages long, that the problems that I had brought up and listed, too much debt, too much credit, and too much leverage, were actually much worse than I had anticipated. And we've recently seen that Greece has just gotten a third bailout, which is probably going to be $100 billion. Now, none of this money can realistically be paid back. As the IMF has said, you need a haircut, and you probably need a 70% haircut, unless their GDP spikes up to around 20% from now until 2020. The debt is not payable. But I think there are bigger problems here with democracy and liberty being usurped by the European Union coming in with an iron fist and stamping it down on the people that wanted something else. So I think that we need to give a little red card to a couple people, Germany and the institutions of the ECB and the IMF, for replacing democracy and liberty with blackmail and new normal fascism. So plunder is now the designed.
So Mitch, you're saying that they themselves, the troika, these sort of transnational, transglobal sort of corporations and governing bodies, they see the solution to, because all Ponzi schemes hit a moment where they collapse, the Minsky sort of moment. So they see the solution to that is like removing democracy, stealing assets, bail-ins, bailouts, all that sort of stuff. But what is a solution that you and I or anybody ordinary in the street that's not, that's having those, our democratic rights usurped in order to keep this Ponzi alive? Is there a solution to it, or should we just try to find the right Ponzi to get in on and hopefully, get some assets out before it collapses?
No, it's never good to get in on a Ponzi scheme. The important thing to do, and I'll work with anybody that wants to hear the solutions in more detail, but it's kind of difficult. What you need to do is you need to assess your risk, and you need to understand that what the governments are going to do is they're going to come in and confiscate your assets. Because quite frankly, we've seen this model in Cyprus, we've seen the model in Greece, and what they've done with all of the debt and the bailouts, they've actually taken trillions of dollars of toxic assets off the profligate banks' balance sheets and transferred it directly to the taxpayers. So now it's taxpayer liability. So in a situation like this, what you need to do is identify, quantify, and manage the risks you have in your portfolio, what your exposures are, and where you can put your money so that it's in a sound, safe place when the government comes in and decides to go draconian on you and start saying, well, okay, if you have over X amount, we're going to keep all of that, and just too bad, like the typical Cyprus model that we spoke about on this program quite a while ago. So I think what you need to do is diversify your asset base by, first of all, there's not one size that fits all. So what you need to do is go through everything in your portfolio and come up with a strategy on what you think the world is going to look like in a year, 2 years, and 5 years, and how all this money printing is going to play out. I think what the media, the mainstream media, has not really highlighted is the $3.2 trillion to $4 trillion that have been sucked out of the Chinese economy by the stock market collapse in China.
In terms of, let's look at the banking system itself. What about the role of the fact that banks create over 90% of all our money in the system? That seems like it's a Ponzi scheme, it's a Ponzi system from the very get-go. Is there a sort of monetary solution to this situation where we find ourselves ever in?
Well, there is a solution. Obviously, cryptocurrencies are still very emerging. I mean, we need to look at the genesis of how we got where we are and where we're headed. Now, oil prices, as you know, probably in Q4 of 2014 started plummeting. So what we've got to look at is how that impacted, and we spoke about this on your program, how that impacted all the producing nations. Now, they're in a recession/depression that nobody's talking about. So they're going to have problems with their economies. The banking system is fundamentally not stable and insolvent. So what you need to do is look at diversifying your currency risk depending upon what your denomination is. If you're denominated in euros. Now, just because there's a catastrophe and there's insolvency in the banking system doesn't mean that there's not opportunity. Don't get me wrong. There's tons of opportunity in the misprices that are out there, but it takes somebody other than a high-frequency trader to understand that and understand the macroeconomic picture and the bigger picture and what trades you should jump on and what trades you should cut. So going back to the banking system, what you want to do is diversify in terms of your currency exposure, and that's an individual preference. But you don't want to have overexposure to any one currency, and you want to have some kind of commodity exposure, and you might want to have, as I would say, a speculative investment, some cryptocurrency as well. I think diversification is the key, and understanding where all the risks in your portfolios are and managing them appropriately are the important issues you need to think about.
Right. Well, that's certainly a good approach for somebody who's managing money. But the issues here, as you point out, in terms of democracy being undermined, that's a bigger issue. And so the solutions about reorchestrating or re-architecting the global economy, this entire 30-year period of wealth concentration has been enabled by the 30-year bull market in bonds. And isn't it true, Mitch Feierstein, that if any government were serious about restoring equilibrium in the market and restoring a wealth and income distribution in the market, they would raise interest rates? This would deflate the Ponzi scheme, reallocate resources, and this is typically the solution that central banks have used in the past. However, starting with Greenspan's put in this era of always trying to manipulate markets higher, that tool has been laying dormant now for 20 years. But historically, that is the tool that is used to restore balance in these markets. Isn't that correct, Mitch Feierstein?
Well, Max, you're 100% right, and I would agree with you that, as the Greenspan said, it's his responsibility to take the punch bowl away when the party gets raucous. But the party's been raucous for 6 or 7 years. Now, what we've got to understand is that the central banks have little to no credibility left whatsoever. Because if you go back and you look at 2009/10, they said, or 2008, they said in 2010, we're going to raise rates. This is the end of the zero interest rate policy. And then they always figure out a reason why they can't taper a Ponzi scheme. Now, if you go back also and look at how much debt has been accrued in the past 7 years of this ridiculous policy of money printing and expanding the debt and the $5 trillion Federal Reserve balance sheet, for which there is no exit strategy because nobody is going to buy the bonds. You'll have your bond Armageddon happen.
Yeah, but Mitch, let me jump in because Mitch, they keep finding reasons not to raise interest rates because the markets in these economies keep getting worse and worse as the result of their low interest rate policies. So the reason why they can't raise rates is because they keep rates so low. So they're looking into a cracked mirror here. They're assessing the problems that they created as justification as to why they can't solve these problems. Look, going back to the previous century, when you had concentrations of wealth like this with the robber barons, or in America, you had leadership. You had a Teddy Roosevelt who came in, and he was the trust buster. He broke up Standard Oil. He broke up the steel cartels. Isn't it the responsibility of leadership in America to break up these banking cartels and these intellectual property cartels? Isn't it directly the responsibility of the President of the United States? I mean, doesn't the President of the United States have any responsibility whatsoever in allowing these pernicious, highly concentrated, wealth-destroying power conglomerates to form and to perpetuate. Mitch.
Yeah, there are several issues to address here, Max. Of course, the politicians, though, I mean, the Congress and the Senate, unfortunately, has been a corrupt cesspool that takes $50 billion to gain access to. So it's not open to individuals to run. You need special interests to back you so you can win an election. Now, the markets have become manipulated to such an extent that the only reason why stocks are rising are corporations are borrowing massive amounts of money and issuing bonds because of zero interest rate policy, buying their own shares back, which uses financialization to create earnings per share. Less shares, higher earnings. But there's zero organic growth. There are less jobs. Wages are crumbling, and there's massive inflation. If you look at ground beef prices in the United States, they've gone up over 150% since 2009. And a lot of the companies, what they're doing for a 16-ounce package, they've shrunk it down to 12 ounces and use the boxes the same size and charge you even more. So when they tell you that there's no inflation or they tell you that the job market is great, it's actually not. We've had this discussion about the unemployment figures in America and the participation rate. It hasn't been as bad since 1977. And if you look carefully at that statistic, you'll see from 24 to 54-year-olds, participation collapses, where if you look at 55 plus, the retirees that were working on their nest egg, that were prudent savers their entire lives, now are forced to go back enter into the job market because they can't make ends meet. They were expecting to have some sort of residual income in their golden years, and now we're at a historic high, 55 plus or older, and part-time jobs are the new normal.
We'll pick it up in a second and continue on with this. We'll be right back after this break.
The interview for tomorrow is confirmed. 10 a.m.
At the word trade, it is hoped that they will find a global solution to a global problem.
Revamp of the system.
Crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want.
They're the war hawks selling you on the idea that dropping bombs brings peace, to the chicken hawks forcing you to fight in the battles that they start.
The news hawks try to tell you that celebrity gossip and tabloid murder trials are the most important news of the day.
While the hawks of advertising tell you that you are not cool enough unless you buy their product.
Watching the hawks, watching the hawks.
These are the hawks that we, along with our audience, will be watching.
Okay, welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser with Stacy Herbert with Summer Solutions with Mitch Feierstein. So, Mitch Feierstein, to pick up where we left off in the first half, I want to talk about inflation for a second, because you mentioned you do see inflation in the United States. However, according to some like the New York Times, there is no inflation. But you mentioned that the packaging for a lot of these products is the same, or the contents are been reduced, what's called shrinkflation. So there's an example of kind of a stealth inflation. But also, it's interesting, Mitch, because when we talk about inflation now, we're not talking about wage inflation because wages are not inflating, but we are talking about prices going up. And this is because of a complete collapse in competition. Because of the cheap money policies, because of the mergers and acquisitions, because of the consolidation in these industries, you have less and less competition. And of course, when you have less competition, then the producers are able to raise prices unchecked. Is that a fair statement? Is that what you're seeing?
Yes, Max. What I was saying is that, you know, in financialization, what's happening with the corporations, I mean, there are mergers and acquisitions are a big part of the profit statement. And what they're doing is borrowing massive amounts of money at very low interest rates, buying shares back, and funding the CEO and the executive board's coffers and paying themselves much more, sucking all the money out. And also cost cuts, they're laying off employees, so it makes it smaller. If you look at CapEx, we're in a dangerous spot. There's no capital expenditure. And in a growing economy where you see GDP going up, you see capital expenditures and savings both on the rise. We haven't seen that in 20 years in America. We haven't seen it across the board. And people aren't looking at the serious warning signs. They're just looking at day to day, like all these kick the can down the road policies that the EU, the IMF, and the ECB have. They're directed at the 1%. And unfortunately, that's not sustainable because you can suppress people. It's like winding up a rubber band very, very, very tightly, which is what we've been doing for 7 years. Eventually, that rubber band's going to snap. I mean, there are going to be unintended consequences. Like I said, the Fed balance sheet, $5 trillion. There's no exit strategy. There's no one in the market that can take that kind of supply down when they need to get out. And they're going to incur huge losses, and interest rates will go up a lot faster than people expect.
Now, Mitch, I wanted to continue talking about Ponzi economics and pyramid structures of our economy. You, for example, mentioned that the over 55s are more in work than those under 55. Part of it is because of Obamacare, and these people are on Medicare, so employers don't have the responsibility to provide health care to people who are on Medicare already. But if you look at the structure of the U.S. economy, much of it has benefited the baby boomers, who much of the things like Social Security and Medicare and much of U.S. policy has benefited them because they were the largest voting bloc. You could see that in the fact of how much wealth they had accumulated when they were in their 30s compared to a 30-year-old today. However, there has been a change in the latest census data, and that is that millennials now represent a larger voting bloc. They have more millennials than there are baby boomers because baby boomers have died off. So there are now more millennials than there are baby boomers. Now, is this a possible, could the millennials vote to end the pyramid structure that favors the baby boomers in exchange for something that favors them? And if so, what would that look like?
I think it gets to be pretty difficult because politics has become so corrupt in Washington that you need $50 billion to move anything. I mean, that's what a Senate race costs. That, you know, I don't know how much they're going to spend on this presidential run in 2016, but it takes the lobbyists pretty much run America now, the lobbyists and corporations and special interests, which is a gigantic problem. Going back to Obamacare, I discussed that in the book in a chapter. The United States pays more per person than all of the G7 countries by a multiple of two or three times. And the service and quality and death per 100,000 is the highest in America as it is anywhere. But you have coffee and you have nice looking facilities. But, you know, I think what it is it's another stealth tax on America.
Yeah, but Americans act like, you know, many Ponzi scheme participants, people who are duped in a Ponzi scheme, one thing that often happens is what police find is when they confront the victims of the Ponzi scheme, they refuse to believe that this guy Madoff or whoever was operating the Ponzi scheme could possibly have done this to them. The same thing with Americans. If you try to tell them that their healthcare system is 3 times more expensive than any other in the world, they'll say, we don't want socialism. We don't know what it is, but that's having healthcare for all and at a third of the price. But they refuse to believe it. So they are like in love with their captors. They are in love with their Ponzi scheme operator.
Yeah. I mean, what it is it's Stockholm syndrome and it's media indoctrination, which is really dangerous here. I mean, you know, the media is fairly controlled and they get a scripted narrative that they put across that most people believe and they worship and they say, oh no, I can't stand out. I can't have any critical thinking and think for myself. But, you know, as I've said, and I've written an article, and the title of the article was Numbers Never Lie, but Politicians, Bankers, and the Mainstream Media Do. So what you need to do is critically analyze all the components and figure out for yourself. Like my book, I have 40 pages of endnotes. It's not conspiracy theory. I use the government's own data. So you can't dispute anything that's in there. It's not made up. It's factual. It's government data. So I think that people need to go back and just not watch the Kardashians on television, which is what's happening in America, and figure out where we're going and how to protect themselves. You know, that's how we got into this mess, what happens next, and how to protect yourself. Those are the 3 crucial elements of formulating a solution, which is what we really need to do now, because we've come down to the wire, and this Ponzi scheme is about to hit a wall. It's like you're in a Ferrari and you're going 180 miles an hour and you hit a patch of ice and you can see the brick wall in front of you. So the red lights are flashing and you know it's going to end badly, and that's how all Ponzi schemes end, very badly.
Right. Well, you know, the thing about the hospital industry is that you can't outsource it to a foreign country. So the people in the hospital industry will say, you have to pay 3 times anywhere else in the world to get what we have in the hospital. And that's your patriotic duty, to pay 3 times what everyone else in the world is paying here in the hospital. Simultaneously, if you go to Walmart or Costco, it's your patriotic duty to buy products at a price that's so cheap that it puts most of the country out of work. So there's this incredible mental gymnastics that are portrayed by mainstream financial press, but by mainstream press, could be the New York Times, that try to convince people that they should pay triple for their local hospital services. It's their patriotic duty. They don't want to be socialist, but they don't want to pay less if they go to Walmart to kill their own jobs.
But this is what I said.
I'll give you an example.
Schemes think this. This is how they think. This is
that's what I'm saying. And if you dig down into it, there's even another layer of imbecility.
Yeah.
Where if a Ponzi scheme is just a simple, you know, the new investors are paying off the exiting investors. But here you have a group of people, Americans, who are being mentally waterboarded by some of the most ridiculously intellectually dishonest claptrap ever spewed out of the mouth of a Fox propagandist. And they eat it up like dogs eating their own vomit.
Yeah, I mean, Max, if you think about this, I mean, there are a lot of things with the healthcare system that's rotten. If you look at the state of Pennsylvania, they have more MRI machines than the entire country of Canada. There's some outrageous statistic. It's just because of what the insurance companies pay, right? A friend of mine had a bee sting in New York and went to the emergency room. No big services, but they got socked for $3,000 worth of bills for going to get some Benadryl and some other tablets, you know, in the hospital. $3,000 for that.
Okay, but look, Mitch, I mean, look at a country like Norway. Norway, it's very expensive, but everyone gets paid a lot of money. So you have wage inflation and price inflation, and you have a rich society. Only in America do they pay more for health care and fire themselves by buying at Walmart. So they're mentally, you know, you're in New York. I mean, they're about to put Donald Trump as a legitimate contender for president of the United States. Here's a guy who's had not 1, not 2, but 3 lobotomies, and he's still running for president.
Well, this just tells you how dysfunctional the system in America has become. I mean, but Hillary Clinton's going to morph into anything you like. She'll tell you anything that she wants, and she's got more money behind her with Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan and all the banks that pay her, what, $300,000 or $500,000 to come and talk for an hour. But those aren't favors in advance for if she gets elected. And the people in America will be like, oh, no, you know, it's name association. And unfortunately, they don't look at the policies. People are more excited about the way the media portrays them, or wow, I like that person. They look great. I like her hair. I like her outfit.
Mitch, we only have a few minutes left here, so I want to get back to the topic, and the topic is Ponzi's, and we're talking about solutions to the Ponzi's. Now, in the last few minutes here, I'm assuming that the only solution really is to own some gold, because that is the only asset class in the world without a counterparty risk. And if everything we see around us, every single thing from your healthcare to your education to your property market, every single thing is a Ponzi scheme, your political system, everything is a Ponzi scheme, the only solution is to own some gold. And finally, you were a derivatives guy, you wrote derivatives, you concocted them, you know derivatives. Is that, what about that in the state of this last, this escalation of debt in the last few years? What about the derivatives market, and how is that going to finally blow up, and is there any solution to that?
Well, the problem with derivatives is it's an unknown quantity how many are out there, and each derivative product morphs into bigger derivative products and exposures. So, there are banks like Citibank and Deutsche Bank that have $73 trillion in derivative exposures, and the regulators can't figure out how big they are. Should gold be a staple in everybody's portfolio? I would argue yes. But if you look at basic economics, it's supply and demand. I have never in the history of the planet seen where you have exceptional demand for a commodity, prices fall. But you don't have regulators. It's a rigged game. The regulators won't come in and look why there's one counterparty that has sold like 4,000 gold contracts at once to actually slam the price down, or silver contracts. And it happens day in and day out in the gold, in the silver pits. If you look at time and sales on Bloomberg, you can see that there are people clearly manipulating these markets in the paper markets. So do you want to own physical? Absolutely. You don't want to own these ETFs. I said it on this program a while back, a year ago or 2 years ago, that ETFs will eventually explode because they are not necessarily correlated to the underlying asset class, and they offer no guarantee that they are. So your fundamental holdings have to be in something that you can actually touch and quantify. So I agree with you on that.
That's what I said. Gold is the solution, the ultimate solution to all problems, all economic Ponzi scheme problems. Thanks for being on the Solutions episode of the Keiser Report.
Thanks for having me, Max and Stacy.
All right, that's going to do it for this chapter of Summer Solutions here on the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Mitch Feierstein of planetponzi.com. Tell us what you think about some of the solutions offered here. Offer your own in the comments, should you choose. Until next time, bye, y'all.